My name is CeeLo, and I'm here to introduce you to Despia. To those unfamiliar, Despia is a fusion archetype introduced in Dawn of Majesty. Its first wave, frankly, really failed to impress many, with its powerful main deck cards overshadowed by some pretty lackluster extra deck bosses. After being shuffled around Shaddoll and Dogmatica lists by players who were, well, tired of normal summoning Alistair, the deck received some pretty potent support in Burst of Destiny, finally letting it stand as its own deck. While the best card is slated for a release sometime around February, it's got some powerful tools it can take advantage of in the current format. Notably, this card, branded in red. Much like Despia's first wave, this card is generic and doesn't lock you into anything, letting us take advantage of some cool extra deck boss monsters that otherwise don't have homes. So, without further ado, let's move on to the deck profile. The very first thing you're likely to notice looking at this list is that I'm not running any hand traps. This is an intentional choice for two reasons. One, hand traps are kinda bad right now, with most of the top meta contenders able to play through at least one without even breaking a sweat. Cards like Triple Tactics Talent, as well as potentially Dark Ruler No More or Forbidden Chalice, just make more sense in the main deck. Two, Despia benefits from running a ton of gas, and it's able to play through known interaction well going second. Dramaturgy of Despia is the deck's resident big guy. I think a case could be made for any number of this guy, though I'm currently running two because of my ad-lib ratios alongside Superbia. He's probably the most easily accessed monster negation of the deck, but I think his best selling point is just how resource-friendly he is. Ad libitum of Despia is the other 8-star of the deck, and part of the new wave of support. His on-field effect makes your monsters big, making him a fantastic out to cards that your fusions otherwise struggle to take care of, but his effect of being used as fusion material is the real notable one. It allows you to safely link off cards like Quiritus for a bigger field presence push, and is also generic, allowing you to bring back cards like Destroy Your Phoenix Enforcer from graveyard or banished, even after your opponent's dealt with their recursion effect. I ran one for some time, but his recursion effect has pushed me to experiment with two for now. Aluber, the Jester of Despia, is, well, Stratos for your back row. You run 3 of this card. As they trigger on being normal or special summoned, they're able to be summoned back on the opponent's turn via cards like Branded Opening, Ad Libitum, and Floating Into off of Quiritus. The graveyard effect also comes up, especially when the field spell is in rotation. Despian of Tragedy is also a very good 3-of. I've seen lists cut this card to 2 or even 1, but with the number of ways this list in particular has to access fusion summoning, you want to see it as often as possible. The graveyard effect often also goes overlooked, but it is very potent if you're not using it for fodder for Branded in red. Despia, Theater of the Branded, I currently run at 1. You have a ton of ways to search polymerization, you have ways to search this, you have ways to recur this, it stays on field. You really don't need to be bricking on this card. Foolish Burial I'm also going to mention alongside the Despia cards, as your main target for this card is Despian of Tragedy, though it has some other occasional versatile uses. 3 Branded Opening, this card is great. It's a Rhoda or Emergency Teleport for any monster in the archetype and does not discard for cost. It's the only card in the archetype that locks you at all, and even then it's only into fusion summoning, only for the remainder of the turn. The Bailing-Sec effect protection on this card is also fantastic and very easy for your opponent to forget about. Finally, 3 copies of Branded in red, which, in my opinion, is the reason to play this deck right now. You'll notice the only restriction on this card is having a Despia monster in your grave. No archetype lock, no fusion lock, no restriction to only fusing into Despia monsters. A case can be made for running fewer of it, but this card is just so good. Next up, we're going to talk about engines that I'm running on my list, starting with what I think is the most important one, the Destiny Hero engine. Now, the Destiny Hero engine is an absolute shoe-in for Despia. I'm sure that Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer needs no introduction, but the engine actually does so much more for Despia than provide a recurable Trident. We're running 3 Fusion Destiny, of course, as well as 3 Destiny Hero targets in the main deck, 2 copies of Malicious, and 1 Destiny Hero Denier. Now, the reason that we're running Denier and Malicious over something like for example, Celestial and Dasher, is that Mali and Denier provide a ton of field presence, either accessible turn 1 post-Fusion Destiny, to be used as fusion material on the opponent's turn, or on the follow-up to go into cards like Underworld Goddess. Fusion Destiny can also be used as a starter for Despia, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. All in all, the entire Fusion Destiny package provides an immense amount of value for Despia. I cannot stress enough how important this engine is. Up next, we have a small fairy enabling package of triple Diviner of the Heralds, 1 Trias Hierarchia, and 1 optional Dark Lord Superbia. Diviner is a very versatile additional normal summon for the deck, capable of sending Trias to make a Link 2 and put Tragedy in rotation, or just sending Tragedy directly to search for an additional Despia name. While the Link 2 you're able to go for on its own is just Verte Anaconda, opening some other very searchable cards enables a line with Superbia that ends on the first Dark Lord and an indestructible Appaloosa at minimum. Finally, rounding out the pile of engines making this deck tick, we're on a patchwork engine of triple Fright for Patchwork, triple Edge Imp Chain, and 2 of the tried and true classic Polymerization. Chain in particular is a potent card in this deck, netting you an additional copy of itself and a poly when it's used as fusion material, when it's discarded off of Condemned Dark Lord or Dangerous, or when it's linked off. Of course, lastly, to round off the deck to 40, we're on 1 copy of Called by the Grave and 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talents. In the extra deck, we're on 1 copy of the first Dark Lord. This guy isn't easy to make outside of the Diviner line, but Jesus, this card is powerful. It grants every fairy you control targeting protection, and more importantly, grants you a ton of resource generation on both players' turns. After that, we have our Despia fusions. I'm running 2 copies of Quiritis and 1 copy of Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. Quiritis is deceptively strong, not because of what it does on field, but because it's very difficult to interact with. Your opponent is unlikely to run over it by battle, and removing it from the field in any way just continues to trigger Despia's Congo line of dudes from the deck. Masquerade is a new addition from Burst of Destiny, with recursion and a chain energy-like effect on field, forcing your opponent to pay 600 life points for each card they activate. While this effect will just win you some games in certain matchups, Masquerade is also a great finisher, essentially forcing your opponent to cowboy themselves out of the game. We've got the Destiny Heroes, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, again, needs no introduction, this card is a house, and Dangerous enables the starter line, requiring only 1 Dark Effect monster alongside a Destiny Hero to fusion summon. Its on-field effect to send a hero from deck to grave, usually Denier, also comes up as a way to trigger Chain. We're on 1 copy of Elder Entity Entis, which can be sent off Diviner either going second, or by bringing Diviner back on the opponent's turn with the first Dark Lord Superbia combo. Finally, we're on 3 different Predaplant fusions. While I am running Super Poly in the side, you can capably and frequently make these off of Branded in red. First up is Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon, the silliest of these inclusions. Greedy Venom has an ignition effect to target an opponent's monster, reduce its attack to 0, and negate its effects. Additionally, it has an effect that, when destroyed, destroys all monsters on the field, and recurs itself from the grave. This card does not specify being destroyed by an opponent's card, meaning you can trigger this with your own Destroyer Phoenix. If you open with a line that makes Verte, you can go into this on your opponent's turn with Verte and something like Ad Libitum or Dramaturge. Next up is Trifio Veridum. Triffy's a good boy. He's recursive if you're able to do plays with Dragostapelia, and is Solemn Warning on legs for extra deck monsters. Last of the Predaplant fusions is Dragostapelia. This card is definitely the easiest to make. It's a negate, it's one of the few you have access to, and brings back Trifo Veridum. Notably, both Trifo Veridum and Dragostapelia can be enabled off the Fusion Destiny as a starter line by leaving either excess darks in the form of Malicious and Denier on field, or an excess fusion in the form of Dangerous. For the links, we're on Underworld Goddess. This card is great. It's so easy to make with spare Fusion Destiny materials, with floaters, or off of Diviner. We're on Appaloosa and Condemned Dark Lord. Both of these cards are in here for the Diviner lines primarily, but can be made in other circumstances as well. And finally, Verte, who is still not banned and therefore getting abused in here as well. Finally, with the deck list out of the way, I wanted to take a moment to highlight some other potential options you can run, either for budget purposes or just to put your own flair on the list. As a replacement for Diviner, if you're looking for another small engine, 3 copies of Chaos Space, 1 White Dragon, 1 Black Dragon, and 1 Albaz in the main is pretty good. This is complemented with 1 copy of Striker Dragon, 1 copy of Verte Anaconda, and 1 copy of Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres in the extra deck. You can either use the dragons to go into Verte without using your normal summon, or go into Spheres, which can then summon Albaz from deck on the opponent's turn and fuse one of their cards away. On the topic of more fusion enablers, Keeper of Dragon Magic is a decent normal summon. This guy can search Fusion Destiny, as well as cards like Fusion Deployment for Albaz or Instant Fusion for Millennium Eyes and Winda. It can also bring back Albaz and go into this fusion monster, Borreload Furious Dragon, which kind of behaves like a budget destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. Concerning Albaz, Fallen of Albaz and Albion the Shrouded Dragon can be included in the main deck. Albaz can be floated into off of Coritus, as well as be sent from deck to grave as cost for Albion's effect to upstart you, enabling Branded in Red early and without using your normal summon. Albion can also send cards like Branded Opening to upstart you, effectively cycling a card while granting your fusions protection on field. Dogmatica is another option that you can run, though it conflicts with the Fusion Destiny package. I don't think this is worth running over that engine, but this package is notable in that you can take advantage of Albion the Branded Dragon, the fusion monster, and its ability to set any branded spell or trap from the deck during your end phase. Draglubion and Numeron Dragon make for some very quick and easy OTKs. I personally don't think Despia needs this, and I don't have room for this package in my list, but I don't think it's a bad option. Finally, a few last notable cards. Despian Proskinion exists and makes for a pretty good Super Poly target versus things like Drytron, though sadly the card doesn't do much else besides that. Winda can be made off of Instant Fusion, which will stick to the board if you have a branded opening in your graveyard. Links like Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, Nightmare Unicorn, Relinquished Anima, and Link Haribo all have a potential home in your extra deck. And finally, honorable mentions to these Super Poly targets, Mysterion the Dragon Crown and Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. These guys are pretty good as well. The last thing I want to cover before I end the video is a few noteworthy plays the deck can do, starting with how to use Fusion Destiny as a starter. If you're looking to make use of Fusion Destiny as a Despia starter, all you really need to do is open Fusion Destiny. But to make the most out of it, you'll also need access to either Red, Theater, Patchwork, Poly, or Chain. In this specific replay, I'll be using Chain. Start by activating Fusion Destiny, sending Tragedy and Mali to graveyard to make Dangerous. Tragedy will trigger here, adding Aluber to your hand, then you can normal summon Aluber, searching for Branded in Red. If you opened in red, you can search Theater here and your combo is the same. From this position, you can activate Dangerous, pitching Chain to send a Nair from deck to grave, trigger Chain to search Patchwork, and then Patchwork to add another Chain and Poly to your hand. Now you can activate Mali in grave to summon Mali from deck. From this point, you can set up for either Dragos Depelia or Trifoveridim. I'm going to go for Trifoveridim here. Activate Poly, fusing Malicious and Dangerous into Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. Bring back Denier, then trigger Denier on field to put the banished Mali back on top of your deck. Then trigger the Mali in your graveyard to summon the Mali you just put back. Your end board should be Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer with 3 darks on field and a Branded in Red set live to go into Trifoveridim by adding Tragedy from your graveyard back to your hand. In order to go into full extended Diviner lines, you'll need 3 cards, Diviner herself, access to Poly, and any Dark Fairy. In this example, like the last one, we'll be using Chain. Normal summon Diviner, sending Trias Hierarchia from deck to grave. Activate Trias here, tributing Diviner to summon itself, then trigger Diviner to summon a copy of Tragedy from deck. From here, link into Condemned Dark Lord, then trigger the effect discarding Chain. If you opened Poly or Theater here, pitch any other random card instead. You'll be adding Superbia to hand, then trigger Chain to add Patchwork, activate Patchwork for Poly and Chain, then use Polymerization, fusing away Condemned Dark Lord Superbia, and the Dark Fairy that you opened into the first Dark Lord. If your Dark Fairy was Adlib or Dramaturge, you can trigger that here. Otherwise, activate the first Dark Lord, ensuring that it's Chainlink 1. Summon Superbia, then use Superbia's effect to summon any fairy from your graveyard. If you opened Aluber, then you can summon Aluber here and get the Surge. Finally, link Superbia and whatever it brought back into IP Masquerena, or Verte Anaconda depending on the matchup. On the opponent's turn, if you made IP, you'll be able to trigger the first Dark Lord again, summoning back Superbia and Diviner, assuming it was Chainlink 1, to send Entis for a pop. Then, you'll be able to trigger IP, linking away itself, Diviner, and Superbia for a 3-mat Apollousa that is under both IP's Destruction Protection and the first Dark Lord's Targeting Protection. As an additional piece of information, the Apollousa also interacts in an interesting, unique way with Despian Quiritis. As Apollousa sets its original attack to a specific value on summon, and Quiritis does not negate effects or reduce attack, merely sets it to a specific value until the end of the turn, if you use Despian Quiritis with an Apollousa on field, the attack will temporarily be reduced to 0, and then during the end phase, return to its original value that it was summoned with. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. If you enjoyed this video, or if you like Despia, feel free to subscribe, as I'm going to be definitely putting out more videos on Despia in the future. I've also included a link to the Despia Discord down in the video description, and if you want to talk to more like-minded people experimenting with this deck, please come on by. Anyway, my name has been CeeLo, thanks for watching, and cheers. See ya.